Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified YouTube channel. My name is Salvador Briggman, and today we're talking about telling your story and what realm or what part of that does that play in a Kickstarter campaign or Indiegogo campaign. I think there's a lot of mystery around that, and I kind of want to debunk that and kind of demystify that a bit for you today in the hallmark fashion that I do in today's video. It's coming up right after this. Okay, so your story, there's a lot of confusion around this, I think, is how much should you disclose about you in a crowdfunding campaign, right? When it comes to a Kickstarter or if you're doing an Indiegogo, how much should you be a center of this campaign? Because you might have read online some different stuff. Some people were telling you should be at the center point of the story. Other people are saying that you shouldn't even be in the story, right? So it can kind of be confusing, and I wanted to kind of shed a little bit of light on that in today's video. So that is the topic that we're going through, as well as when is it appropriate, how much should you be sharing, and also a little bit of an idea of the different categories and how that applies. So let's get into that right now. Okay, so I always say this on my videos that it really varies based on the category that you're launching on. The category determines so much when it comes to your crowdfunding campaign. Not only does it determine the marketing strategy, the fulfillment strategy, does it also determine the look and the feel of the page, but also with this element of storytelling, right? Because there are different categories that just require a little bit more storytelling than other ones. But however, story always plays a role. And the question is, how does your personal story as well play a role in that process? Your story should be used, or you want to think of this as almost being used in a marketing light. So we're not talking about the story of A to Z, I was born here, I grew up here, I went to school in Washington, D.C., then I lived in New York City for a lot of years, I did this, I did that. I'm not talking about your full story. Usually we're referring to the story of the product being created. So I had this idea after seeing this problem, came up with this product, went through these different iterations, figured out this stuff, decided to use these kinds of materials, worked with this team, right? That's more of the story that I'm referring to when it comes to your crowdfunding campaign page. And I think that in the early days of the industry, story was a much bigger thing, particularly when it comes to creative categories, but also just people telling their story more candidly to a camera with a little bit less high production value. So I'm first going to talk about the categories where story matters less, but in a different way. And then we'll get into the categories where story matters a little bit more. So if you have a technology gadget or gizmo or design product, the story itself as you as a founder doesn't nearly matter as much as the story of the product itself. And by that, I mean who is using the product? What is the story in that person's life, right? So if you think of it almost as they're a superhero, or I like to use Star Wars as an example. If Luke Skywalker is the main character of the story, your product is like his lightsaber, right? It's going with him wherever he goes to help him on this grand adventure as he's going and trying to defeat Darth Vader, right? So you want to think of the story as actually the story of the person, the customer, but also the story of the product. And that's going to work a lot better for a high, fast-paced kind of a video, and also a campaign centered around a technology gadget, gizmo, or design product. You want to think about the story itself of the individual. How does that individual see themselves? Do they see themselves as an urban outdoor backpacker? Do they see themselves as a work-at-home type who's looking for other solutions to become more productive? Do they see themselves as someone who really cares about sustainability and finding fashion and apparel that relates to that message that they want to embody in their life? So the story is actually more important when it comes to the product and the customer, and that's typically shown through the video, and it's almost like a byproduct of watching the video. So it's not publicly stated this is the story, right? Or this is where it goes from A to B. It's more of an implied thing where when you watch it, you come away thinking, oh, I guess that would be a good product for me, because you see someone who looks like you in the video, or you see it being used in these particular use cases in an office environment, or in streetwear if you're wearing clothes, or in the mountains, this backpack, if this is for that kind of a scenario, right? So people come away with what I call that subconscious conclusion, and they fit themselves into that story when it comes to more of a physical product like that. And they imagine themselves going and hiking through these really cool terrains that make them feel like they're Frodo going on, through going to Mordor and going through all these mountains and treks and stuff like that. It feels like you're in the Shire or something like that, right? It makes you put yourself in that environment when you're seeing video footage like that. And if you are the customer and you are aspiring to be like that, you fit yourself into that story. So with products, physical products, digital products, physical products, tech products, design products, those kinds of categories, the story not only manifests itself in the video, but also in the photos as someone is going down the page and they're looking at the photos, as well as the font, the design, the color scheme that is used, all give that vibe of maybe luxury or wilderness or rugged, etc. So that's something that you should be aware of, is how the story plays in. Now at the very bottom of the page, typically there then is some kind of a segment where the creator or the creators expand on the actual iteration of the product, the story, to getting it to that point. But again, it's always done in the lens of how can this help the marketing? How does this particular part of the story maybe demonstrate that these are rugged, durable materials that the product is made out of? Or how does it underscore the fact that there's a rock solid commitment to sustainability, right? The story, you almost want to use it in such a way that it's kind of like a marketing instrument. Now, that might also be a small part of the video. For example, there are videos out there where the founder is talking to the camera, or where they are interviewing other people and people are talking about, this is why I made the product. And that's great, but it shouldn't be just one long like a monologue, put it that way. It should be interspersed, thinking of it almost like a sprinkling, a seasoning on the video. At the end of the day, people are going to care most, what is the product, what is the problem it solves, what is the promise, the functionality, the benefits, and then the story is what wraps it all together, and it creates that community feel, and it also makes people feel like there's a legit person behind this and that they're freaking passionate about this thing that they are doing. So that is the purpose that the story serves with those specific types of categories. With other categories where we have more creative categories, so for example, a book or a tabletop game or a comic book or tarot cards, I've used that example before. These types of categories, dance category, theater, film, the story plays a bigger role. But again, it really depends on the star quality of the individuals that are involved. So for example, like with a tarot card, if you have some really incredible artists or influencers who are involved in this process, and there was a reason why you decided to go to this particular angle, that is going to matter a lot when it comes to the story, because that's really how you got from point A to point B. What's not going to matter as much is like the personal story of the creator from A to Z. What's going to matter more is what inspired that person to make that particular decision. You think of any larger story, for example, like a movie, it's always a snapshot. It could even just be a day or two of the life of a character in that movie. It's not the entire A to Z. It's very rare is that that's the case. Usually it's like a snapshot in their life, and you want to kind of take that same message or that same tactic and apply that to your category if you're more of in a creative category. So for example, with a book or a publishing project, it's really tempting to tell the entire story of the author going from point A to point B, but instead, if you could sort of hammer more on the moments that cause that book to come together, and how, let's just say it's a book about multicultural learning or learning about other careers or that kind of stuff, how does one segment of your life maybe fit into that story, which caused you to then create this book and make it available for lots and lots of people around the world. So the story, I would say, matters more typically, or it's more apparent, more externally apparent in more of a creative category. In more of a product-based category, it's more of like a byproduct or something you subconsciously consume but don't always notice that you're consuming it. When it's more of a creative category, usually it's a bit more blunt, or it's a bit more about what you want to write, the vision. So story is the past, the vision is the future. So when you tell a story, for example, like with the children's book, let's just say like A Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, right? You might be telling the story of the past and why it is that we now need these types of messages, which then leads into the vision of the future. And then it begs the question, do you want to play a part in that particular story leading into the future. With these more creative categories, there is a lot more leeway, I would say, to be able to tell your story in video form, in image form, in text form, because that's really what inspires someone when they're going and they're learning more about this creative work. A great way to think about this is if you go to an exhibit, let's just say you go to an art gallery or an art museum, and if you just go and look at these different paintings, you're looking around and you're like, okay, guess they're kind of cool. Anyway, you guys want to go get lunch, right? You want to go get dinner? There's not as much meaning associated to those paintings. However, if you take a second to do an art history tour, or you read the plaque next to the painting and learn a little bit about what was happening in that individual artist's life before they made the painting, or what caused that particular very like depressed look or very vibrant look, what was going on in their life, what were they emulating, or what threads of their life were they kind of using for inspiration. Then all of a sudden you look at those paintings in a bit of a different light and you're like, oh, I can see it. Like, that's kind of cool. That's interesting. Like, this person somehow figured out to put that on the page, and I feel that. I feel that same emotion, right? And that's because the context, right? If you read a plaque next to the painting, or you did a bit of a tour with art history, all of a sudden you appreciate the art so much more than if you were to just see the painting on its own. So the story will create value. It allows someone, if I tell the story of how, let's just say this ring that I have, and like how it was passed from generation to generation, it went through World War II, and like all this happened, and eventually it came here, and then I gave it to this person, now you have it. All of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this is a really special ring, right? Because you know the story behind it. If I didn't tell that story and I just gave you a ring, you'd be like, oh, thanks, great, like what's it worth, right? It's like, it doesn't have that same level of meaning for you. So with an artistic or more of a creative category, the story is also a way to build up meaning for the actual product or the actual thing that you are doing.
Want to take all the stress out of fulfilling your Kickstarter rewards? Fulfillrite is the turnkey solution that puts product delivery on autopilot. The Top Campaigns uses trusted high-tech provider to store, package, and ship their products. Focus on growing your business. Leave shipping to the experts. Don't wait. Get a custom quote from Fulfillrite today. Link in the description.
Now, the other thing would be when you as a backer are, or if you're selling to the backer, I guess you as a creator who is trying to convey this to the backer, if the backer is buying a part of the story. So to make no mistake, whenever you're buying a product, you are buying into some kind of a story or some kind of a narrative. Now that's very, like, I would say the only time that that doesn't exist might be if you're buying like a tool, right? Like if you're going to the shop and you're buying a tool to put in your tool shed or whatever, in a toolbox. But at the same time, a lot of people will buy things they don't need. They'll buy tools they don't need, or they'll buy things that are part of their hobby. I have a GoPro that I rarely use, but I just love filming, right? But you're also then buying into that identity or that story of yourself that I am a carpenter, or I am someone who's a handyman, and I want this EDC tool, or I want this other camera, or I want this other thing. So you are still buying into a story typically when we're consuming things that are not needed but that we want, right? So when it comes to more creative categories, this is something to also be aware of, because for example, with a tabletop game, not only is the person going to be invested and appreciate the product based on the story, but the story is also part of what they're buying. If they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? Or they're playing a tabletop game and they're going through a particular story, it's almost like they're in the game, they're in the story a little bit, and they start to resonate with the different characters that are available there. The same thing goes with a book, if you're supporting that, or like a theater project, or what is the story behind that. So in creative categories, I'd say the biggest difference is that typically the story is much more heavily built in to the product. And for that reason, there's two stories. There's one story, which is the actual story of the creation of the product, which is you, the founder, coming up with the idea, the inspiration, the impact you want to make on the world, that kind of stuff. That is the first story. The second story is that of the actual product, right? And the actual product would be the book, would be the comic book, would be, if it's an album, kind of like a little bit of that and the music that goes in there. If it's like more of a television series, an online series, right, e-series, that's gonna obviously be built in as part of the product. So there's sort of the main difference there, I'd say, is like with a physical product, story tends to be more about marketing. With more of a creative product, story is included in marketing, but also the actual product tends to involve story. And because of that, you have to think a little bit more differently about those two different types of stories that you want to tell. One is from the consumer or the backer angle, and one is from once they're actually using the product and getting them excited about using the product. And when you get those two right, that's when you have a smash success on your hands, and that's when you have a story that's actually really viral and people want to share with other people. So my biggest takeaway is to assess, first of all, which category do you fall in here? Because I obviously don't know. You're on the other side of this here, the screen, right? I don't know which category you fall in. So first of all, assess which category do I fall in. The next is, how can I pull out elements of the story that are going to support the marketing of the actual product? And then begin to think about, when it comes to the telling of the story, how can other people view themselves in that light? If you're telling a story about how you had this problem and you solved it, you came up with this product, how can other people who had that same problem kind of resonate with that journey? Hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Sal, and I'll see you next time.